Bastogne, Belgium, 23rd of December, 1944. The fog lifted over Bastogne as transport aircraft formed up to drop supplies. On the ground, the 101st Airborne had no way to cook. Men were cold, hungry, and surrounded. The K-Ration, a compact, ready-to-eat meal for soldiers, sat in pockets and packs. It promised endurance without fires. The day's drops would test whether portable food could sustain combat under siege. Hot field kitchens stood idle. Smoke and movement invited artillery. By late 1944, the U.S. Army treated food like ammunition. It had to arrive dry, intact, and on time. Fires gave away positions. Pots took minutes the enemy could count. Cooks needed roads that no longer existed, so the Army leaned on the K-Ration. A waxed box held canned meat, biscuits, a bouillon cube, and a fruit bar. It opened by hand and fit a jacket pocket. More important, it rode a parachute. This siege would show why the Army favored what could fall from the sky over what needed a stove. Bastogne, Belgium, 23rd of December, 1944. The fog thinned into strips and lifted off the woods. Men in foxholes watched the gray turn to pale blue and listened for engines. If aircraft appeared today, the siege might loosen for a few hours. By dawn, the 101st Airborne Division held a shrinking perimeter under artillery and small arms fire. German units pressed every road and hedgerow trying to crush the bulge around the town. Truck columns could not enter. The roads were cut and mined. Bastogne's crossroads still mattered, so the line had to hold. Hot meals had stopped days earlier. Field kitchens sat silent because smoke and movement drew shells. Fires under direct observation were invitations to die. The front could not spare the time or the men to boil water, much less stew meat. The K-Ration, a boxed, single-meal combat ration, fit the gap. It needed no flame and little water, usually only for a powder drink. A waxed carton carried canned meat, biscuits, a fruit bar, coffee, and cigarettes. It slid into a pocket and it could survive a fall if packed tightly. By late morning, men stretched crackers and candy, chewing slowly to trick their stomachs. Some bartered cigarettes for any extra can of meat, a ration inside the ration. Hunger closed in as surely as any platoon. Cold magnified it. Food now served as fuel and insulation. Calories meant warmth in dugouts, alertness on outposts, and steadier hands on rifle stocks. In winter defense, long hours and numb fingers punished the underfed first. A box that opened by hand could buy another day on a road junction. C-47 Skytrain, a twin-engine transport aircraft, carried what no truck could. IX Troop Carrier Command, USAAF unit directing transport operations, organized the flights. The United States Army Air Forces, USAAF, waited for a hole in the weather bigger than a corridor on a map. Clear skies finally made a visual airdrop possible. Crews formed up over airfields and climbed, bundles lashed and parachutes packed. They would aim for fields south and west of the town, then circle if flak and wind allowed. On the ground, signal panels lay ready to mark drop zones in bright cloth. A workable sky meant rations could arrive dry and intact. The division had refused a German surrender demand on the 22nd of December, 1944. Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe sent back a single word: "Nuts." That answer bound the garrison to hold with what remained. Food, like ammunition, had to match that resolve. Cooking could not win that race. Field kitchens needed roads, time, and shelter from eyes and guns. None existed within the ring. A pocket meal that arrived by parachute solved two of those problems by design. The choice was not about taste. It was about exposure. A kitchen meant a fire, a truck, and a queue in the open. A K-Ration meant a hand tearing waxed paper behind a log. The first engine notes reached the line as distant hums. Men peeked from cover and scanned the north, then the east. White canopies would be easy to spot against the new light. The first window for a visual drop since the siege began had finally opened. Each bundle that landed intact translated into hours on a trench line. Hours meant patrols could move, medics could work, and outposts could stay awake through the long dark. The reverse was simple and brutal. Empty pockets meant slippage at the edges and, eventually, a break. There was no guarantee. Wind could scatter parachutes over German positions, or trees could snag bundles. Artillery could force aircraft to toss early or late. The plan depended on visibility, discipline, and luck, but the logic was sound. The army treated food like ammunition because both kept men alive and effective. A stove needed time the enemy could count. A box needed only a hand and a knife. By noon, the sky mattered more than any kitchen. The promise was simple. Food from the air could keep rifles on the line when stoves could not. If the weather held, men in foxholes would eat. If it closed again, hunger would fight for the Germans. By the fourth day inside Bastogne, the arithmetic of heat and risk became simple. The M1937 field range, gasoline-fueled portable stove for unit cooking, needed space, fuel, and minutes. None of those existed near the line. The range had to sit level, vent properly, and run without interruption to turn raw ingredients into hot meals. Every step announced itself. Smoke rose and drifted. Heat shimmer wobbled above rooftops and courtyards. German observers watched for those cues through binoculars and scopes. Artillery responded fast. Ranging shots, artillery test rounds used to adjust aim, bracketed any smoke source in 2 or 3 salvos. A kitchen crew in a courtyard gave the enemy a fixed point to correct on, then destroy. One burst could flip pots, ignite fuel, and end the day's feeding plan. The flame itself posed a second danger. Open burners ran on gasoline under pressure. Fuel cans clustered near the range because cooks had to refill before flames died. Shell fragments and sparks turned that cluster into an explosive hazard. Moving the range required trucks that the garrison did not have to spare. Bastogne's chokepoint streets were narrow even in peacetime. Rubble and wrecks squeezed lanes further until one stuck vehicle blocked a whole run. There was no room to stage a mess line without putting men in the open. Insulated food carriers, lidded, thermal containers for cooked meals, worked well on good roads. They kept stew and coffee warm for hours. But carriers had to move along streets swept by mortars and machine guns. A run from a rear kitchen to a forward platoon meant exposed motion and a predictable route. Water added another layer of risk. The town's pumps and wells sat where shells fell, and water points were under fire. Melting snow took time and fuel the kitchens could not spare. Even when melted, cold water needed treatment, and the extra boil threatened to draw attention all over again. Could the crews simply set up farther back? Not for long. German pressure forced frequent displacement. A stove that anchored a position became a liability when the line bent or shifted. Crews faced a choice. Abandon the range and carriers, or die trying to save them. Losses had consequences beyond hunger. Kitchen teams were trained and few. A wounded cook meant one less set of hands to feed a company the next day. A destroyed range left an entire battalion without a way to prepare bulk meals even if supplies arrived. The clock hurt them too. Setup took minutes soldiers did not have. Adjusting burners, priming pumps, and building enough heat for kettles could not be rushed. Any pause for shelling meant the cycle started again. The enemy could count those minutes and time fire accordingly. Field kitchens excelled in conditions that did not exist here. On open campaign with cover, concealment, and steady roads, they pushed hot food forward twice a day. Woods and folds in the ground hid smoke. Trucks delivered carriers under camouflage nets in dusk. Under siege, the calculus flipped. Bastogne offered none of that. The perimeter sat within eyesight of German outposts. Courtyards were boxy and open to airburst shells. Streets funneled noise and movement straight to listening posts. A kitchen became a signal flare for artillery officers. K-Rations sidestepped those vulnerabilities by design. The main items needed no heat. Meat, biscuits, and fruit bars were edible from the box. Powdered coffee or bouillon improved with hot water, but cold water sufficed when the guns watched every wisp of steam. Distribution changed the risk profile. Instead of one flame feeding hundreds, each soldier carried his own meal. A crate could be broken down under cover and passed along foxholes. If a shell landed, the loss was a few boxes, not the only burner in range. There were constraints. A full day of K-Rations delivered roughly 2,800 calories. Winter defense with heavy clothing and long watches demanded closer to 4,000. The deficit showed in thin faces and slow hands. The box fed a man, but thinly, especially in cold. Fuel economy mattered as well. Every gallon saved from a burner kept vehicles moving or heaters running in aid stations. Melting snow for coffee consumed more fuel than the drink returned in energy. K-Rations minimized that trade because most calories came without a flame. The town's geometry delivered the final verdict. Bastogne streets forced any kitchen to choose between exposure and irrelevance. A hidden range could not reach the perimeter. A range near the perimeter could not hide. German artillery punished both choices. Under those conditions, the army treated heat as a luxury and silence as protection. Food had to be as quiet as ammunition. K-Rations met that test with waxed cartons and pocket-sized cans. Field kitchens did not. The result was not ideal, but it was survivable. Men ate cold meat and hard biscuits because the alternative was a cratered courtyard and a burning stove. In a siege, endurance counted more than taste. Portable meals kept the line fed when hot pots could not. Clear weather finally opened a corridor and planners seized it. Crews flew under visual flight rules, flying by visual cues, not instruments. Thunderbolt, a single-engine fighter bomber, circled above the C-47s to deter fighters and to harass gun crews as needed. The purpose was simple: get food and other essentials into a pocket that could not cook. On the ground, soldiers prepared air recognition panels, colored fabric sheets for signaling aircraft when shelling allowed. They laid prearranged shapes in cleared fields south and west of the town. Wind and blasts flipped cloth, so details sprinted out between salvos to reset panels and drag mislanded bundles off open ground. Smoke was risky, color was safer. More than 240 C-47s from IX Troop Carrier Command launched in serials, timed groups of aircraft launching together. They climbed, formed, then streamed toward the Ardennes in stacked lines. Pilots dropped to a few hundred feet over the drop zones and slowed to near 110 miles per hour. Low altitude reduced drift and tightened patterns, but it put aluminum in range of small arms and flak anti-aircraft fire. Loads were mixed by design. Ammunition and medical chests rode beside gasoline and food. Jerrycan, a 5-gallon steel fuel container, Stacks filled corners that could crush lighter items. K-Rations made up much of the food component because they handled shock, weight, and moisture well. D-Ration, a high-calorie emergency chocolate bar, added dense calories in small volume for pockets and aid bags. Color coding helped sort chaos on contact. Bundles fell under parachutes dyed to signal contents, with food using specific colors so runners could prioritize. Packaging absorbed impact through layered fiberboard, burlap, and straw, with web straps bracing the contents. Cans, biscuits, and chocolate bars survived hits and hard landings that shattered glass. Plasma bottles and delicate instruments did not fare as well when bundles missed fields and slammed into frozen ruts or trees. Navigators combined radio cues with terrain features now visible through the haze. Road spokes around the town made a distinctive wheel, and dark forest blocks framed frost-bright fields. Once the ceiling lifted, visual runs beat any bad weather beacon in accuracy and speed. Crews trusted landmarks more than electronic aids in a sky crowded with friendlies and split-second decisions. P-47 made close passes on suspected gun pits when muzzle flashes betrayed positions. They strafed edges and kept German fighters at a distance while the transport steadied for release. Even so, low runs brought holes. Flak burst under the C-47's bellies and along their wings, and a few aircraft trailed smoke as they climbed away. The trade remained. Altitude meant drift, low meant damage. Over 100 tons fell around the pocket that day, roughly 7 20-ton railcar loads. Not everything landed inside the lines. Wind and nerves nudged releases a beat late or early, and trees claimed their share. The planning assumed loss and scatter. What mattered was volume and proximity good enough for recovery under fire. Chain of custody existed only in fragments. The drop created heaps in fields, lanes, and hedgerows with no receipt and no manifest at the point of impact. Quartermaster details, infantry patrols, and medics formed ad hoc parties to haul bundles back using handcarts, litter poles, and ropes. Guards posted near piles to prevent double takes and to keep paths clear for stretchers. Every minute a man spent in a field tugging a parachute line was a minute under observed ground. Food had an advantage in this scramble. A K-ration box fit a coat, and a D-ration fit a pocket. Runners cut chutes, stripped rations from mixed loads, and moved them in small packets through alleys and trenches. Fuel cans and ammunition needed muscle and time. Food needed hands. That difference kept the line fed while heavier items backed up at choke points. The system was built for imperfect success. Low flight, colored panels, coated chutes, and shock-tolerant packaging pushed the odds toward useful delivery. K-rations and emergency bars arrived intact more often than fragile goods and spread quickly once on the ground. The problem shifted from sky to street, from release points to foxholes, and from tons to mouths. Parachutes began to appear over fields and streets, white dots against the pale sky. Some bundles drifted true and dropped into open ground. Others drifted past hedges into German lines or hung in treetops. A few hit frozen ruts and burst, contents sliding across ice. Men counted the good landings and the losses with the same quick glance. Scouts and service troops ran in short, timed dashes when the shelling paused. They crawled the last yards, cut shroud lines, parachute cords, and dragged loads by the webbing. How long could they stay in the open? Only as long as it took the next bracket of shells to arrive. Regimental collection points took shape where walls and beams still stood. Cellars and barns turned into sorting bays as quartermasters stacked bundles by parachute color and grease pencil marks. Ammunition and plasma, dried blood fluid for transfusion, moved first on litter poles, with medics stripping salvageable bottles from broken cases. Food followed within the hour as safe lanes briefly opened through alleys and behind walls. In that shuffle, not everything survived. Some bundles were ripped by near hits or stripped by shellfire that forced parties to drop and run. Even so, enough food reached companies to put something in every pocket by dusk. If every pound had landed inside, the drop held several days of meals for the perimeter. Losses cut that margin to a thin buffer. Boxes opened fast once they reached foxholes and dugouts. A K-Ration meal unit gave biscuits, a small can of meat or cheese, a powdered drink, a fruit bar, sugar, and gum. D-ration bars broke into pockets, hard, bitter, and reliable when everything else ran low. Soldiers tucked the chocolate near the body to warm it before shaving off flakes with a knife. Coffee powder met melted snow in mess tins. Heat, when possible, came from a guarded candle or a hobo stove, improvised tin can burner. Men cupped hands and helmets around the flame to hide it from eyes and wind. Most drank it barely warm, grateful for taste more than temperature. 3 meal units made roughly 2,800 calories for a day. Winter defense pulled closer to 4,000 with layers, patrols, and long watches. The gap showed by evening. Men saved sugar for the darkest hours, traded cigarettes for extra meat, and chewed gum to keep mouths from drying in the cold. The food fought back in small ways. Canned meat bent and opened with a key, but the gelatin set hard in the cold and needed scraping. Biscuits softened if crumbled into coffee. Otherwise, they broke with a sharp snap that echoed inside a hole. The D-ration demanded patience, not teeth, and veterans shaved it thin to avoid a chipped molar. By nightfall, the perimeter steadied. Rations were not abundant, but they were present, and that mattered. Hands shook less on rifle stocks, and outposts held through a long, brittle dark. The first true hot chow for many men would not come until a corridor opened days later, on the 26th of December, 1944. By late afternoon, the drop zones looked like stitched quilts of white cloth and brown crates. Men ate cold meat and biscuits with gloved hands and said little. The day had offered a blunt lesson. Food that fell and opened anywhere kept the line intact. Food that needed a stove did not. Bastogne proved that a combat ration had to travel by parachute and be edible on the spot. There was no time, cover, or permission from the guns to light burners near the line. K-rations fit that requirement because they tolerated shock, resisted moisture, and opened without tools. A box that met the ground intact turned into calories within a minute. The math favored what could be counted in pockets. A single C-47 carrying roughly 3 tons, about 2,700 kilograms, of cargo translated into several thousand individual meals once packaging and chutes came off. Across the day's cereals, even a modest share devoted to food meant tens of thousands of meals scattered within reach. One aircraft's payload fed more riflemen, faster, than any truck column that could not reach the town. K-rations stacked cleanly in bundles and broke down cleanly in trenches. They fit a cargo bay, a bundle, a handcart, a pocket. Kitchens asked for trucks, fuel, and time, and then asked the sky for permission to burn. A field range could feed a company when roads were open and smoke was safe. Neither condition held under siege. The Army already owned choices that tasted better. Packaged ingredients intended for preparation in field kitchens delivered variety and heat when cooks had space to work. That system pushed stews, bread, and coffee forward in insulated containers. It also broadcast location through motion, flame, and smell. Under direct observation, those signals invited adjustment fire in minutes. Commanders inside the perimeter shifted tactics to quiet food. K-ration cases went to regimental cellars, then to company caches, then along communication trenches to platoons rotating on and off the line. No mess lines formed. No pot clanged in a courtyard. Leaders kept patrols moving and outposts manned while avoiding the fixed points that kitchens created. The K-ration had limits everyone felt. It lacked warmth and variety, and winter work burned more energy than the day's 3 units supplied. Monotony set in quickly, yet the box delivered certainty under fire. It arrived dry more often than not, survived rough landings, and fit the gaps in time that shelling allowed. In a place where minutes killed, reliability counted more than flavor. Relief brought a visible change. When the corridor opened on the 26th of December, 1944, field kitchens rolled forward with the first convoys. The smell of coffee and stew returned to ruined streets, and insulated carriers began their runs under escort. Their presence marked stability rather than reach. Hot meals meant ground control, not clever logistics inside a pocket. Portability equaled survivability in the days before that. Food that moved with soldiers survived the siege better than food that demanded a fixed point. The day's logistics set a clear rule that endured beyond the Ardennes: hot meals when terrain and pressure allowed. Pocket rations when contact and weather dictated. That rule echoed later in mountains, jungles, and cities where fires drew eyes faster than men could eat. What stayed in memory was practical, not romantic. Parachute silk froze stiff and then turned into bandages and slings. Boxes split, cans dented, and still the contents fed a hole on the line. Cold cans, bitter chocolate, and dry biscuits kept rifles steady and sentries awake until armored columns broke through. Bastogne did not make K-rations perfect. It made them indispensable at the front edge. After relief, the dual track held. Kitchens re-established twice daily hot chow wherever trucks and cover existed, and morale rose with steam from pots. K-ration stayed in pockets for the next move, patrol, or sudden halt. That duality, hot chow as a luxury, K-rations as insurance, was the lesson the siege made impossible to ignore. On the 23rd of December, the drop fed a town no kitchen could reach. K-rations were not ideal, but they were present, portable, and enough. Bastogne showed the army that hot meals could not be the plan at the front. Food had to be as quiet as ammunition. The promise from that first clear sky held: white canopies, waxed cartons, and a hand tearing paper behind a log.